Hello and welcome to the Commune podcast. This time we will be talking about Sins of a Solar Empire Rebellion. As always, you're part of the discussion, so if you want to join in, just call our toll-free number. This time we have yourself, Adrian, and Fox with us. Fox, how are you doing?
I'm very good.
All right. Adrian, how are you feeling?
Tired, but good. But I won't pass out this time. I swear.
All right. Yourself, are you about to pass out?
No, I'm enjoying a game of Sins of a Solar Empire.
Yeah, I saw someone signed into Steam just as I was checking out Revengeance. Um, so, Fox, give us your RTS history.
It's pretty limited, actually. I think my first one was something called Kingdom Under Fire, which was some generic real-time strategy game with humans, and I think some. I don't know if it's just orc race or some other fantasy race, but that's where it starts. And then moved on to StarCraft, and then nothing until this.
Okay. So you kind of knew the basics, but didn't have too much.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not really an expert at it, but a lot of the knowledge transfers pretty well, I think.
Okay. Adrian, I'm made to understand that you have little to no RTS experience.
That's right. In fact, I'm a little surprised at how similar I kind of feel that I am with Fox. I thought he was actually way more experienced than I was, but looks like I got the wrong impression. Um, yeah, mine was like StarCraft 64 way back.
StarCraft 64.
But yeah,
I've heard bad things.
well,
That was
later
my
levels being like really hard as hell.
StarCraft
And
64 was hard as hell.
Yeah, well, for me it was, but the thing is, my memories on that are so blurry that
Just like
I
the
can't even
N64 resolution.
remember. Yeah, I can't even remember what the fucking factions are, but yeah. So this is the first, I would say, real RTS that I'm actually playing and getting into.
Okay. And yourself, you've played a decent amount of RTSs, right?
Yeah, although I too started on StarCraft 64. Um, yeah, I've played a good deal of StarCraft. Obviously, eventually off the N64. Uh, Age of Empires 2. I played a lot of Dawn of War. The expansions for Dawn of War. Um, Company of Heroes. Company of Heroes might be my favorite.
Okay.
And like 3 or 4 Command and Conquer games.
All right. And myself, I have no. Well, I played like the first mission in StarCraft, and aside from that, I have no RTS experience. So, Sins of a Solar Empire, I was jumping in the deep end, it kind of felt like. Um,
I think I might want to correct myself
yeah.
because yourself and I did have a talk about figuring out what the hell RTS that I played with my friend in college. Because I kept saying Age of Empires 4, but that game doesn't exist. It was actually Age of Empires 3. And yeah, I played one game of that. I got the hang of it pretty quickly. So that is the only other RTS I played.
All
And I
right.
think it's been 2-3 years since I played it. But yeah, my memories are more vivid on that than StarCraft 64.
Okay. And so most of us have very sparse experience with RTS games, and we're not very well versed in talking about them. But there's also the problem that Sins of a Solar Empire doesn't comfortably sit within the RTS genre. Um, there is an emphasis on expanding and exploring, and with Rebellion they add details like diplomacy. So it's almost like a real-time 4X rather than a straight-up real-time strategy game. And for both of those reasons, I just wanted to get down to a very simple talk about what you can do in the game and how you win, how the game is structured. Just something to ground us in ways that we intuit for other games like puzzle games or platformers. So I went back to Richard Terrell's outline for parsing video games, and he has 4 basic components for video games: mechanics, interplay, variation, and counterpoint. Mechanics are the actions you perform. Interplay are the potential reactions to your actions. Variation is the amount of difference between different game elements, such as mechanics or enemies or what have you. And counterpoint are concurrent, quote, game ideas, which is basically to say challenges or gameplay things going on at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
So, Adrian, a mechanic is an action that you perform that affects the game state. And do you have an example of where we might find mechanics in Sins?
Yeah, and naturally, mechanic would be for researching things. That is a mechanic in the game. Moving units, naturally, that's also a mechanic. Building things, that's also a mechanic.
So tell me...
And if you were...
Just tell me, how do you move something?
Select a unit, click, drag, left-click, drag, or just left-click, and then left-click on the point you want to move them. That's how you select it. All of the clicks themselves, that's the part not to be confused with the mechanic. And I think that's the one important thing with Richard's definition, is that clicking through a menu isn't actually a mechanic.
What's also important in what you just mentioned is that all of the mechanics are from a God perspective.
Yeah.
So can you explain what that means? Or actually, yourself, is that something you'd be more comfortable discussing?
I can take a stab at it. I guess this is something... Well, never mind. I won't start talking about genres. I guess a God perspective would be a way of distributing player control such that they're not tied to any one active avatar within the game. The player has no avatar. They are able to directly affect the state of multiple different in-game entities. It's like a distributed sense of control.
Mm-hmm.
The way I always imagine it is that on your home planet, there's some commander looking at a computer terminal, and he sends email orders or something. Go to this planet, and then because of the magic of technology, your unit instantly receives the order and decides to go there.
It's interesting that you phrase it that way, because that is almost literally how it's presented, email and all, in Romance of the Three Kingdoms and Koei games, where each territory you may have, or the player commands a set of generals, and they can designate the generals to whatever responsibilities, or designate responsibilities to the generals, and either you can tell the general to make decisions according to their best judgment and essentially let the game play out on its own, or you can tell the generals to take individual actions with their turn. So, it might take a general 5 of his turn points to raise an army or something like that.
Okay. And Fox, can you name a more complicated mechanic than moving?
More complicated than moving. So I actually wanted to take a step back for a second and sort of ask you to clarify what you mean by game state. Is that just sort of the game board itself, being in our case it would be the whole system, and then in specifics it would be the planetary well we have direct influence over?
Yeah, the game state can be summed up as the game board, and because time influences the state of the game board, that comes into it as well.
Right, a state is a collection of all the attributes of an element, and the game state is a collection of all the states of all the elements.
Yep.
So a
Okay.
mechanic can be something that influences a unit's position or attributes or whatever.
So I'm trying to think of this
Right.
as a board game, and then what I do as a player to influence the board.
Mm-hmm.
So there's very basically moving units around. The more interesting part is developing your planet and conquering planets, I think.
So what's something
And
you can do to conquer a planet?
send a missionary ship over to colonize it. You've changed the state so that a planet goes from being neutrally owned or owned by someone else to something you own, which directly influences your rate of income production and the immediate access to things you can build upon. So you'll now have access to crystal ores or metal ores or other things you've got access to.
Okay.
So I think something inherent in what Fox is describing is that, and this might be part of the trait of a God game as well, the elements behave autonomously. So when I say behave, I don't necessarily, or I mean they actually have actions that they can perform autonomously. And so, for instance, by the strictest definition of a mechanic as something that the player does, the player doesn't actually conquer a planet. The missionary vessel does by using its colonize skill, and the player can set that to automatically cast, or the player can set that to manually cast, which those would be mechanics.
Okay.
And then the player can send the missionary vessel to a planet's gravity well. So that's a movement command. That's a mechanic.
So then, by that sense, there's actually a lot less direct mechanic influence than I had thought of. There's moving units, directly commanding units, if that option is available, and then buying, selling certain resources.
Right. So I would say that the mechanics in this game are pretty easy to sum up because it's anything that you can click on in the menu that is a command.
So that would include
Like-
research or setting fleet capacity as well.
I mean, if you select if you select a single ship, you can see it has attack, it has stop, it has move, and it has, well, tactics management is a submenu, so that's not a mechanic. But those are three mechanics or three commands that translate into mechanics because they immediately affect the state of that selected ship.
So Fox, do you think this term mechanics is useful for thinking about sins?
Thinking about sins strategically, I don't know if it gives me that much help. Thinking about it on a more, I guess, if I'm wondering how it's, I'll just say that strategically, I don't think it helps me out very much. Sort of breaking down the game into ideas so I can analyze just different aspects of it. That's very helpful.
Yeah, that I was about to say, I wouldn't have known how to respond to that question because
All right.
it was basically that the question you asked was kind of was a little weird.
So, Agent,
And that-
I think based on like the last two words I heard of what you said, the gist of it might have been that the idea of mechanics is an abstract descriptor of the game, but it doesn't necessarily need to like have a meaningful application to a game.
I guess, yeah. The simplest way I can put it is that a mechanic is like extremely low level. Like it's the most low level thing of a game, and it's just the starting point at where you can go to understand a game. As far as like Fox was talking about strategies on that things, that's when we're going to start getting into the other stuff like with interplay and variation, of which they are built on mechanics. So we work our way up.
I would think at least that mechanics are less useful for thinking about sins than they would be for something like Shin Neketsu Koha, where when you discuss mechanics in Shin Neketsu Koha, you can discuss the kick takes so many frames, reaches out so wide, and so you can compare the mechanics and say, the kick is better than the punch in this scenario, and we can line up all the frame data and whatever. Whereas I don't think that's something that is as easily applicable in sins.
I think that a lot of the action or the mechanics we've described are generic. So when you say, for instance, doing research, well, look at all the different research you can do. So, I mean, if you wanted to define them as mechanics, I guess you would have to differentiate all of them because they all affect different states and whatnot. But from a player perspective, the process of commanding something is like abstracted from exactly what the elements or the properties of the elements that are going to be affected are. Like telling a ship to move really depends heavily on what ship you're telling to move. If you send, as Fox described, if you send a missionary vessel to a planet, it does something completely different than if you send a light vessel to a planet, yet it's the same mechanic.
So what you're getting at is that there are like classes of mechanics where buying a ship is performed the same way, but then each instance of buying a ship has a different effect on the game state.
I'm not sure if classes is the way I'd describe it. I just think it's that what we've said, that mechanics are not that meaningful way of looking at a strategy game because it's so, like, you could define an individual class of mechanics or an individual mechanic for buying a light frigate or buying a colony frigate or whatever, but then that's just defining every single player action as a separate thing, and the player already knows that every single action is a separate thing.
Okay.
There's also the fact that mechanics are, again, maybe this ties into what you'd call God perspective. Mechanics are, in this situation, state neutral. So, in, like, as you said, in Shin Niketsu Koha, if you're moving while you, or if you're running while you kick, or press the B button, it might do a different thing than if you're standing and press the B button. I guess those are two different mechanics. What I'm trying to say is that you can always do all the same things. It doesn't matter if you have ships in the middle of combat or something, you can still give them all the same commands you could otherwise.
Right.
I just need a refresher in memory, like what the original question was, because
we were considering whether or not mechanics are a useful term for thinking about sins.
I would say straight yes. And the thing is, like, even if you don't want to use the word, it's like we're always going to be thinking about those basic actions and how they build up to those, strategies that we use. Because, I mean, whether you want to or not, you are considering that this is a game with a build mechanic, a move mechanic, a research mechanic, all those other things. Like, how in detail we need to look at them, like, are they individual, are they dynamic, all that may not matter as much, but that they are things in the game that change the game state. Like, that's always a consideration, no matter what game you're talking about.
Sure, that makes sense.
So, this doesn't necessarily need to be a redefinition, but mentally, I guess, and in writing and speaking, I've always used the term mechanics a bit differently than the Richard Terrell definition, and it, I guess, maybe comes from the fact that I have history playing a lot more than just action games, where, to me, a mechanic is a way that any element can affect the state of the game. So, for instance, the colony ship being able to colonize a planet, like, that's a mechanic. It's not a player mechanic, but it's belongs to a sort of super class of interactions that include what anything can do to anything else. So in a strategy game, I think that's what you end up looking at a lot more. Like, what is the AI going to do in this situation? What is what can this ship do to affect this other ship? Because so much of it is ultimately going to be at a lower level than the player is actively controlling.
Right. The idea that someone is flying around in the colony ship and he pushes the colonize button, like, that would be a mechanic for him.
Yeah, and even at the, not without even getting into anything sin specific, when you give a move command, that inherently is an abstract command that you give that translates into, like, the unit flies at a certain speed in that direction. and the speed might be what's important there, or how the unit's going to route. Of course, in Sin's routing is not very important. That's the kind of thing that's, I think, the level at which interesting things happen.
Okay.
Yeah, I brought that up earlier too when I said the mechanic, at least the way we're using for this podcast, that is actions you perform that affect the game state. Like, that's just a really low level thing, and it's really when we get to interplay and variation and all the things you were talking about that's what we shoot for. Like, we start the mechanics, work up to interplay, then variation, and then counterpoint, each of which starts off with mechanics, which is, those basic things, and then we work up to talk about the more complex ones.
I guess maybe because I come from a programmer's perspective, to me, like, the way that individual elements can interact with each other is lower level than any of those things. Once you bring a player into it, to me, that raises the discussion to a higher level. And so in a game of chess, like, you need to talk about the rules of the game before you care about how the player moves each piece.
Okay.
That, and I think he actually does cover that, and that's things like rule systems and dynamics and things like that isn't actually here.
Right.
But
I'm not suggesting that, like, this is an insufficient definition. Like I said, there's no reason that mechanics should be defined my way or Richard's way or anything. I was just bringing up a different class or a way of categorizing that I think, or is that the way I look at things?
All right.
No, that's fair.
Moving on.
Yeah.
So our next definition is interplay, which are the potential reactions to your actions. And Fox, could you name a moment of interplay that happened in Sins of a Solar Empire?
Reactions to my actions. So that's something. Well, I'm always finding myself getting bogged down in definitions. So the biggest thing I'm thinking of is I create a Titan, and an announcement is made across all the players saying such and such super powerful unit was created, which is a direct reaction to something I did that will have an influence on all of the players playing. Is that not within the context?
So, yeah, I could have phrased this definition a little better. This is something that would, I suppose that announcement actually would be a moment of interplay in that it affects the knowledge of each of the players and it influences how people play the game. But typically, interplay is discussed as an interaction between two game elements.
So what's a good example of this?
So, like, most generically, maybe in, like, Super Mario Brothers, if Mario makes contact from the side with a Goomba, Mario dies. So that's a basic instance of interplay, right?
Okay,
Yeah.
So mechanic is just the various ways you can control someone. Interplay is when something interesting happens.
And hang on, let me phrase it a little differently. So Mario running into a Koopa and dying, not quite interplay.
That's a one-step interplay.
Yeah, because it's he hits you, you die, but stuff like Mario jumps on the Koopa retracts into its shell, which it can wake up and still run over to hit Mario. That's interplay, of which Mario can also still kick the shell, of which the Koopa can rebound off a wall and still hit Mario again. That's another form of interplay. Like, that's what it is by counters.
So it's one element of the game changing the state of another element, right?
Yeah.
So
the most important thing is think of it like the counters is like the easiest way to think of interplay.
Counters. I'm not sure I understand what you're saying.
So how in a fighting game, if you try to attack someone, you can counter that by blocking?
Sure.
Kind of like that.
Wait, I don't understand how that's interplay.
Is that a reaction?
Do we have, can you read the definition?
Actually, it even says counters, yeah.
Counters.
It points to the article, which says something different, though.
Interplay, just for our purposes, whether or not Richard Terrell intended them to be defined this way, let's just stick to game elements influencing the state of other game elements. And Fox, can you name a time when that happens in Sins of a Solar Empire?
I'm still trying to visualize what this is. I'm sorry.
So
So that
if
would be
The
like
back end-
when a ship shoots at another ship, the ship's HP decreases.
So I've
put a
my
s-
mechanic. I've clicked on my ship. I've clicked on another ship, so that signifies the machine to the unit attack this ship. The interplay is the ship approaches the other ship and begins firing,
Right.
causing the other ship to take damage. That's
Right.
the
It's
interplay.
when the ship takes damage that you have interplay, because that's like completing the link of the interaction between those two things.
Okay, so I think I'm getting it as sort of the next step after a mechanic has been executed.
Yeah,
Right.
you might say
Generally.
it's the result of a mechanic, assuming it doesn't miss or something like that.
Okay.
I put the definition that he actually uses in the article.
Okay, so I think I get that. So to me, then it seems like almost everything in this game is interplay, which makes sense.
Yep.
Meaning you generally command your units to go somewhere, and a lot of the game is the AI being clever enough to know which units to attack on its own, or you saying I don't appreciate that, go somewhere else.
Right.
Um,
Every moment you try to press your advantage against them, and then they try to turn it around, and then you try to turn that back around on them. That's pretty much interplay, which is pretty much strategy games in a nutshell. I don't know if you can find a single strategy game that doesn't have that, or any game
Right.
really.
So, Fox, you mentioned an interesting aspect of interplay.
Yeah.
And that the AI will determine for you, if you don't explicitly say, what unit to attack. And that's
Right.
also kind of what we were talking about with some units will auto-cast colonize.
Yep.
And so, interplay is, unless you play on a granular level, where you're telling individual units to attack individual units, a large portion of the interplay is determined by the AI.
Yeah. It is. And that really makes sense for a game like this. You can't be expected to especially since there aren't turns, you can't be expected to micromanage everything.
Right, that helps you deal with the scale of the game, because the maps can be so many tens of planets wide, and
Yeah.
because it's in real time, you simply can't invest that many resources in anything,
Mhm.
that much time in anything. Yourself, do you think that's a useful way to think about sins?
You mean that interplay is carried out on an AI level?
Or just the term interplay itself?
Hang on. I think it just needs to be clear if we all know what interplay is supposed to mean.
Interplay is one gameplay element influencing the state of another gameplay element.
Right. And it's fair for our considerations anyway to think of it as what we said in Sins about how we're always trying to change the situation to it's always always our favor, so that because you're trying to win.
Yeah.
And the way you use those game elements to turn the situation into your favor, which you can understand as a counter.
Right, so the idea from beginning to end is that you have certain goals for reaching a win state, and you might just say, I'm only considering a military victory. So a military victory entails a certain state where your opponent doesn't have a capital anymore. And so interplay is the way by which you influence gameplay elements to have a favorable state to you.
Mm-hmm.
If we were to list out the interplay in Sins,
We'd be here forever.
yeah, so would it just be essentially like a damage chart?
Not
I mean, just
actu-
if we strictly talk about combat, yeah.
strictly
Go on.
talking about...
It is one way. It is a helpful way of looking at the interplay.
You
because
also
if you know
have
which,
space, right? Units have range.
that is true.
Right.
It doesn't.
So
Yes, Fox?
So if I were to break this definition down as small as I could, I'm thinking when two game elements share information, does that sound valid?
Sure.
That
Because
is
I'm not sure.
probably correct.
Because I can't think of anything more all-encompassing than two game elements. I mean, they're interacting, but at a deeper level, they're sharing information. And in this game, there's a lot of that. like the mechanic of moving one unit near another has a ton of different interplays. If you click on your unit and then click directly on another unit, that's your unit going to the other one and initiating attack. So there are two possible interplays there. There's one, the other units being fired upon, which triggers some sort of reaction to that, either fire back or retreat. And then there's a second interplay where one unit is approaching another unit, which has the same sort of process following that. What do I do because this unit's approaching me? So I'm trying to think of this in terms of the reactions of an element sharing information with another.
So you might imagine that there's two units, they're opposed to each other. They both have these like invisible circles around them, and when those circles intersect, they pop off some automatic reaction.
Correct. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Yeah, the
It
key
wouldn't be
word
when
there
the circles intersect, would it? It would be when one circle intersects the other unit.
Oh, yeah, you're right.
If we were talking about, for instance, aggro range, you don't aggro when your aggro ranges cross over. That doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I think the key word that helped me understand, and Fox's example was also helping me, what he meant by sharing information was, when they oppose each other. So yeah, you're right, Fox. That is at its most simplest.
Okay.
So I think that maybe likewise the mechanics, I feel like there are two levels of this going on, where there's the level at which one ship shooting another one affects its HP, but also the level at which that affects an AI player. So if an AI player sees my ship is taking damage, that will have some effect on their gameplay, right?
Right, so that if I see I had 10 units, now I have 9, that tells me I got to build a new unit, and so I click the build.
Yeah.
So that's kind of a delayed or abstracted sense of interplay.
So yeah, I mean that's because there's also a level at which it influences the unit AI, because you can set your ships. I actually don't know if you can set your ships to retreat in this, so maybe this is not a good example with sends.
You can send them wherever you want on the map, right?
No, but I mean, actually, here's an example. If like a missionary vessel is taking damage, it will run away from whatever's shooting at it.
Okay.
I didn't know that.
That's why a lot of times you'll see them being shot at in like the very fringe of the gravity well, because they won't leave the system. But they'll run away other than that. So that's an effect on the element AI as well. So it does happen at more levels than just like taking away health.
Right. I think a good actually probably would have been helpful if I reread through all these articles, because in part 6 of his interplay article, he actually displays like all the basically the scales at which this happens, one from being like base level mechanics, then to tactics, then to strategy, then to gambit, and then matrices. I forgot what the hell that was, but
right. So,
but basically it's what yourself was basically just saying.
Okay. Yeah. So I mean, I think at the level of tactics, then this is something I think I discussed with most of you guys before. I think interplay is universal. Like anytime one player observes the other player doing something, like it doesn't even have to be an element interaction.
Just that I see your unit moving towards my planet will, affect what I think and do.
Right. Yeah. That's just because it's a symmetrical game. That's not even because it's a strategy game. That's because each player has the same mechanical abilities available to them. And if one player doing something didn't have any ability to affect the tactics of the other player, then it would be an inherently pointless action, right?
Yeah. There's also... that's a good point. And we also need to remember that, most of the time when we're talking about interplay here, we're talking about action games, and that is more at the mechanical level, whereas the nature of a god game and the nature of Citizens of a Solar Empire with AI and all that, is that most of
It
what
occurs
we're
on the
concerned with is at a higher level.
Right. So, like as Adrian
the
just said, something like the action, the tactics, the gambit level,
Strategies.
or whatever. Yeah,
Yeah.
something like that. Some hierarchy of terms that could probably be swapped around. Or so, like the action level is, since that's controlled entirely by AI. That's like not something we really look at that much.
Exactly.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that to me is, maybe I'd have to think about it harder, but that seems like fundamentally what makes a strategy game a strategy game and an action game an action game.
Sure. Okay.
Now, before we continue on with the podcast, I want to interject a bit of a recording I held with Richard afterwards that's relevant to the topic of interplay. There's going to be another one of these at the end of the podcast as well. All right, here we go.
Sorry.
Just so we can get this clear, Richard, can you define interplay for us?
Okay, so interplay is essentially the game rules that define and govern the interactions between specific game elements, and these particular interactions are for they have a counter operative function, right? So it can be as simple as when two bullets hit each other, there's a line of code that says these two bullets nullify each other. That's interplay, right? They're getting in each other's way, they're stopping each other's progress. There's something about the function of the elements that gets altered, canceled, or changed because of these very specific interactions. And a lot of times it's as natural as thinking when you punch something, it needs to go into a I am punched state. If I shoot something, it takes damage. Just very basic rules that we already understand, but thinking about them in terms of the very specific interaction that's being highlighted is important.
Okay. So, and this was a question yourself asked me, and it's kind of when I got tongue-tied, is what is a counter?
Yeah, a counter is just something that inhibits, redirects, or stops the function of some other element, right? So if there is an element that is continually popping out Goombas, right? Super Mario Brothers, those pipes that continually shoot out Goombas, you may counter it by walking close enough to the pipe that triggers a very specific rule that says if Mario is standing so many pixels close to this pipe, do not spit out any more Goombas. Or if Mario destroys the pipe because he's Giant Mario, then obviously do not spit out any more Goombas. So there are just lines of codes that dictate and govern specific functions as defined by the game. Usually we think of counters as, doing things that stop people from trying to win, trying to beat you, which is a good way of thinking about it. But really, interplay is a little bit more broad in that it's just the rules that affect anything in the game, whether or not you specifically think of it as trying to get in your way or trying to ruin your day or beat you or anything like that. It's a lot broader and softer of a term.
Okay, thank you. Now I have this recording. I can just link to this part if that question ever comes up again. Thank you. Oh, one other thing. Because, see, we always had examples of Mario, but now it's just getting me, or helping us understand interplay for a strategy game.
Mm-hmm.
Like, say a turn-based strategy game like Advance Wars, because I love Advance Wars.
Mm-hmm.
Like, what would the interplay of that be? Because you don't think of it the same way where it's just like direct mechanics. Goomba runs towards Mario, Mario jumps over it, or whatever. So
Yeah.
what would it be for something where you have more indirect control of many units, like in Advance Wars or an RTS?
Mm-hmm. Like you're saying, the real timiness of it doesn't really matter. At some point, the elements in the game have to interact. So we got to look at the rules of what happens when they try to do so. Some of the most basic types of interplay that I love in Advance Wars is the fact that you cannot move your units through enemy units and vice versa. So depending on what kind of units you're up against, you can create formations and walls and blockages to where you force their units to move around you, which can create pockets of opportunities and openings for some of your weaker, vulnerable units to sneak through enemy lines without being attacked directly, which is pretty cool. But that basic rule of saying you can't move through enemy units sets up a lot of interplay and counterplay opportunities in the actual gameplay. But it's a really basic rule that everybody understands. Beyond
So
that, go ahead.
So the interplay there is just literally that a unit can't move through another unit.
Yeah, it's
But
a single line of code.
right, but then it ripples forward and impacts your gameplay choices, and so like the
Mhm.
impact of the interplay is almost more interesting than the interplay itself.
Yeah, like every for the most part, the emergent possibilities in the strategy should far be more interesting and numerous than the actual underlying rules. That's why people like the concept of easy to learn, hard to master. The essential rules involved, the complexity is relatively low, but as you continue to think about the consequences and all of its different combinations, it just explodes exponentially, right? That's what people like in general.
Nice. So, I'm wondering, Richard, what have you played any RTSs?
I played StarCraft 2 a lot when I was a kid. I played some
Wait.
whack.
You played
What?
StarCraft 1 a lot.
StarCraft 1. I keep thinking Brood War and StarCraft 2 because I just think of Brood Wars 2 because it kind of is. But that's all right. I played StarCraft 1 a lot in 2000 for like a whole summer and then some, and I watched, the esports and the rise of esports along with StarCraft. I've played a lot of goofy RTS type games on DS and Wii and GameCube and stuff, so mostly StarCraft.
Okay, so this might be a bit of a huge question to ask, because I basically want to ask you like the interplay of StarCraft, because one of the things that after hearing you talk about Advance Wars that kind of just now, holy crap, now I don't know how to talk about this game is the fact that units don't really block each other because it's a space game. There's a lot of open space and units are kind of really small and they're almost to scale with like the size of the planets. So using units to like block off where other units could go isn't really a thing in that game. So I'm thinking,
Yeah, it still happens. In a typical game of StarCraft, what you see in their openings is they try to get as robust of an economy as possible while creating a flexible defensive offensive force. This typically involves building units to block off your entryway. So a lot of StarCraft maps are designed with very narrow, like 2 block width entryways up into their base and only 1 or 2 entrances, right? So players will either use buildings to block off most of that space and then only have a narrow passage to where their own units can get through. And they literally put a unit in between their buildings and it creates a solid wall that opponents can't get through. And
So,
yeah, they do that all the time as a standard strategy.
so the parallel in Sins of a Solar Empire would be having like your home planet where you build all of the important stuff. You're doing research and you have a good economy, and then you have outlying worlds like next to your planet with heavy defenses. And so for any enemy force to get to your gooey center home planet, they have to travel through these really hard defensive planets where they'll take big damage.
yeah, well, Richard hasn't played it, I don't think so. But
Yeah,
I can contest to that it's mostly putting a huge amount of defense on one planet because the map is still organized in the phase lanes, which are
right. What's interesting,
one directional.
Your typical RTS like StarCraft, you'll have full range of 2 dimensions, whereas in Sins of a Solar Empire, each planet within itself will give you 2-dimensional gameplay, but then you only have certain predefined lanes for getting from one planet to the next, and so there's like a linchpin kind of thing going on.
Yeah. Other question is outside of say combat between units. Oh, Richard just answered the count. I wanted to save that one for after I finished with interplay, but thank you. How would you describe the interplay between things outside of combat, like economy? Because I feel like that is a place where interplay occurs. Because you played Advance Wars kind of has that too, I guess.
So like, there's no direct thing that you can do across the map to affect your opponent's economy. That's just a resource that they can optimize. They have to manage on their own. The most direct way to affect your opponent's economy is by attacking their workers in a game like StarCraft. So like, the point is to get deep enough into their base, find out where their nexus or whatever is, their command center, their hive, their lair and then attack their workers, because those are literally the little units going back and forth collecting the resources to give to the army, right? So what I really like about StarCraft in that way is they have a very organic and visual way of understanding your opponent's, the heart of your opponent's resource gathering, right? The heart of their economy, and by attacking that, you pay yourself dividends, because for every worker they lose, they have to both build another worker, get it to the right spot, and then start mining. And that even the time they spend building the new workers, even if they're rich, is a huge loss. It sets them back on the economy curve, if you will. And Serlin wrote a whole article series about a college course in Berkeley.
Yeah.
About StarCraft and how they teach you the underlying calculus behind these many of the calculations that happen in RTS games like StarCraft, and a little bit about the curve and the rates of stuff. And it's just really interesting. But essentially everybody knows if you blow up some of their stuff, it's going to set them back, and that's essentially all you need to know to play.
So
Hearing you say it now, I definitely overthought it.
And since your economy is much more directly influenceable because your homeworld has just as many resources as any other planet in the solar system. So a large part of the game is going out, colonizing planets, and taking metal from planets exterior to your homeworld. And so if someone wants to screw with your economy, they can take 1 or 2 of your planets, and suddenly you're making 10 less credits per second.
Yeah, since the Solar Empire, it's mainly just taking away planets. Or, if you can't take away the planets, blowing up their trade ports, destroying their frigate factories, destroying structures, basically. Because those are the things that either make them money or make them units. So,
yeah,
that's the interplay to economy there. Or interplay to logistics, I guess is the other word for it. That is a good point. I will bring up counterpoint later. So let's continue on with the video.
Next up is variation, and quite simply and intuitively, this is just how different one thing is from another. And Richard specifies that what we consider variation is on some level arbitrary, because we have to say, at this point, it's a meaningful difference. Like, if one ship is the same as another ship, but it only takes 1 less crew member, you might not consider that a point of variation because they're so darn similar. So, Fox, how much variation would you say there are in the ship units?
Okay, variation. So, how many units are there in that? So there's a first way you're going to think about the unit differences, and that's in combat, because the way we've been playing it is essentially as a combat game. So the first unit difference is going to be in their attack power and that chart of what they're strong or weak against. So that's the first thing you're going to notice is difference between the units. The second thing, which is also very important, is what their, I suppose, ability is. But now that I think about that, it's kind of a spin. It's a variant of that same thing. The only abilities are colonize a planet or attack something better or worse than something else. So I think that's about the only variation I can think of right now.
There's also build time, right?
For structures? For a unit? Yeah, exactly. It's a very good one.
If I'm to add on to Fox's point, the unit costs is another element of variation. So when building your fleets,
right,
it's
units,
definitely something you consider.
Units have basically 4 resources that you need to go into them. The time, the money, the crystal, and the metal.
You can consider a 5th for research, which also takes time, money, crystal.
Actually, a more literal 5th is fleet
credits. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah,
capacity.
that's right.
Yeah.
Okay. And Adrian.
Did you hear me say fleet capacity? I think I might have dropped out for a second.
Yeah, we got.
You did, but
capacity.
we still caught enough of it.
Okay.
So Adrian, how meaningful would you say? There's like 8 different units, right?
There's like
8
different units, but
Do you mean that
and-
literally, or do you mean with
Sorry.
this sense of variation?
8 different frigates.
Okay, yeah, because I was going to say there are way more than 8.
Just speaking about the frigates, because I know there's a lot more. Is there a meaningful difference between each of the 8?
Yeah, absolutely. You have your main. What you go?
No, you were about to go into what I was asking.
Oh, what the differences between them are?
Yeah.
And is that each of them serves a distinct purpose. So you don't have like 2 similar basic like close combat type ships. No, it's like you have one light frigate. Your main kind of bread and butter ship unit that's easy to produce. Then you have your long range one. Then you have the one that's just for colonizing. It's not really meant for fighting. One just for scouting about, just for getting information. Did I mention the one for blowing things up?
No.
Okay, so after the scout is just for one for blowing planets up, and then you have another for basically anti-flak frigates, which are the small strike crafts that the cruisers carry. So that's really and then you get that unique interplay chart between strike craft being obnoxious to other types of ships, but then you have literally anti them, of which your light frigates can easily kill those things, and long range missile for wait no they don't. I was about to say light frigates counter the long range ones, but I don't remember if that's actually true.
Okay.
I think it's that.
Wait, sorry, what were you saying? Light frigates counter long range. Long range missile frigates have like class 0 armor, so anything counters them.
Huh. Yeah, I should have brushed up on that before coming to this.
So yourself, the point is just that there's a wide variety of variation, it's a great sentence.
The fact that you have units, able to counter each other, and that say this unit's strong against this one, but they're not strong against this other one, like that kind of variation is enough to say that they have variation.
So yourself, I was wondering if you could abstract that a little for us and say 8 types of frigates is just a drop in the bucket for sins out of the whole constellation of units, and yet in Mario Kart 64 we get a whole game's worth of variation out of just 8 racers. So what accounts for the huge amount of variation in sins?
So I feel like the issue is that variation matters on the very granular level. Like when you talk about or when you were in the process of defining it, you said at some level lower than X, we don't really care about variation. I can't think of a lot of examples where that. What's an example where that's true? Or you said you used an instance from Sins, but don't use something from Sins because.
So if we take the first level in Super Mario Brothers, and we make a level 1-1, but the Goomba is 1 tile to the right, who cares? That's not variation.
Okay.
Or the phrase Richard used was for minimum degree of difference. That is, at what point do things in a game need to be different for us to actually notice it, or for it to really be meaningful to us? And
I guess
an example of a Goomba being 1 tile to the right, or a Goomba being 1.2 times faster than a normal Goomba is that really a new enemy?
Okay, so then I would say in Sins of Solar Empire, at least as long as we're talking about unit statistics and cost, and those numerical values, those all matter as variation, because the idea of this game is that you are everything is distributed. No single element is significant enough to change the flow of the game. I don't think a good strategy game would ever let that happen, because that takes away the idea of the distributed control. In that case, then one thing does become sort of an avatar of the player and a center of interest. And I think actually, to pull in something totally random, I feel like that's where tower defense games differ from strategy games. But without going on that tangent, you need a force of 20 or 25 or 50 ships to get anything done. So you're talking about sums of those values. Like, how much damage can so many things do collectively? How much does it cost to build this many ships? How much is my income going to be if I have this many planets? And how much does a 5% increase in that actually have an effect depending on how much income I'm making?
So you're, if I understand you correctly, you're talking about how each unit composes, or each unit plays a role in the structure of your fleet. And so if you want a fleet that's more geared towards fighting a certain kind of craft, then you'll tweak your fleet a little towards this end of the things. And having so many different units allows you to color your fleet with strategic subtlety.
Right. And, there's more that you can do. If you want to be anti-light frigates, say you're building long-range missile frigates, in addition to that, you can do some different research that'll make you more effective against those things. And so there's like a multiplicative effect of any small difference that means that I don't think there is a minimum level of variation.
Right.
And there's also like a unity through, like, because everything comes down to what your resources are, like, or your actions are permitted. And this might be getting away from variation, but because all of your actions are sort of waged against your resources, like you can't build a ship, or sorry, not all of your actions. I shouldn't say that, because you can certainly command things without resources. But like building ships, doing research, a lot of your fundamental actions are gauged by resources, which means that everything is essentially intertwined. If a ship costs a certain amount of credits to build, that's going to affect how much research you can do at this moment, or how long it's going to be until you can do research again, or to build the next ship, or whatever. So it all comes down to a single point, like drives the entire game. Whereas in Mario, if there's one Goomba that you move one tile to the right, even if you said that that was a valid variation or a noticeable variation, once the player gets past that screen, that no longer has any effect on the game. And there's no point in Sins at which something you did in the past does not have an effect on where you are in the game.
It's like we're in a constant state of suspension.
Right.
Mm-hmm. To me, I think it's pretty obvious. All the units in this game are different, so variation isn't a factor. I guess where variation may be a more interesting question is between the races, where they all have the same ship types, but like what makes the races different is probably a more interesting question for variation, because they are similar, but it's like, what are the things that actually make them different and make them different from playing the TEC versus the Advent.
Just before we move on, Fox, I wanted to ask, do you think it is meaningful that we have two types of resources to mine, both the crystal and the metal? Do you think that lends itself well to Sins?
Yeah, very well, I think. So if we were to split them into one resource, metal and crystals just being some sort of ore resource, what does that change?
So it changes the fundamental ability to like differentiate pricing, right? Mm-hmm. So it does allow, actually I was saying everything comes down to a single point, but I guess when we talk about having multiple resources, that's a way of breaking that out a little bit and making certain things more independent from each other. Like, for instance, light frigates you can build without spending any crystal. So if you really need crystal, you can just build light frigates for a while and not have to worry about that resource. So it's like an abstract point at which things can be differentiated.
All right. So moving on, our last term to cover is counterpoint, which are concurrent game ideas or challenges. So this is a little easier to think about in action games because If you have one enemy, that's a game idea. If you have another enemy, that's another game idea. And then you just put those two enemies in the same room, and you have counterpoint because those two enemies will interact with you at the same time.
That's, I mean, like
Uh,
maybe if you're roughing it, that's
I guess-
true, but that's not necessarily the case.
Yeah,
I mean,
I was
if you
about
put
to
one
say.
Goomba, if you put a wall in the middle of the room and put one Goomba on the left of it and one Goomba on the right of it, those are not going to have any counterpoint.
Right.
Yeah,
But you get the
And-
basic idea.
yeah,
Yeah, I mean, I know what you mean.
yeah. And I guess just to clarify, like maybe just for Fox, is that they also need to be, different ideas, because if it's just like two, like say two Octrox and Zelda, that's just a more intense version of the same thing. Something like a
Wait.
Zora.
I don't think
Really?
that
What?
is. I mean, they'll be different in space, and so you'll have to counter them from different angles or something.
If you have one enemy that's attacking, or two identical enemies, and one is attacking at the same time, the other one is blocking, surely that's a different challenge than both of them attacking at the same time, or just one attacking, right?
You're right. That is a different challenge, and to me, I would point that to variation. But as far as I would say game ideas, like that's when I would say that it's what I just said earlier, where like say fighting two Octrox is just a more intense version of the same thing. That is an enemy that moves around, stops, and shoots a rock that I can block with my shield. It's kind of like in shmups where you're dealing with whether it's 4 or 5 of the same ship types or just one of it. The thing is, if they're all like the same ship type, it's where I said like a more intense version of the same thing. But if it's like say 5 ships and one of those weird snake things from Metal Black, then that's 2 distinct game ideas because it's 2 different enemy types, and that's when I would say
I think I might
Sure. Wait.
agree
Um,
with
that
you.
kind of thing is-
Oh,
Yeah, okay. Yes, do your thing.
So, Fox, does the idea of counterpoint make sense?
I'm still trying to wrap my head around it. I'm trying to think of what's this. So here's the thought I have right now that I'm getting from your guys' explanations is that it's not just a game idea, which is where you've got, like, in the situation, it's Mario on the left and a Goomba on the right walking towards him. In the situation, we know how to deal with the Goomba. You jump on him. A counterpoint is when you introduce another game element. Now, does that game element have to interfere with the first game element, the game idea? Or is it totally separate?
It's just
It has to be in some like
proximity.
concurrent space. Like if Mario can only jump, say like 10 or 2 character heights, and you have a Koopa, a paratroopa flying overhead at 4 character heights, then that's not counterpoint because Mario has no way of interacting with that thing that's above the Goomba. But
Okay.
if the paratroopa is only 2 character heights above the ground, then it is within the concurrent space because Mario can be in that space at the same time as he's attacking the Goomba or whatever, or interacting with a thing on the ground.
Okay, and I don't mean to say this what is it, like in like a challenging way. What's the point of this concept? What does it get you? What's the point of it trying to get me
So
to think about?
I think, generally speaking, the idea is that counterpoint is a way of making things more interesting. So
Yeah.
if you have 2 things that do this, or if you never have 2 things on screen at the same time, then you have a very limited amount of challenges you can afford the player. Whereas if you only have 3 elements and you put them together, you get a lot more combinations than just 3.
right. The idea is that each combination of elements is a distinct challenge from each other.
Right.
Okay.
And it makes it makes the game more dynamic when things are able to layer over each other like that. And yeah, more interesting.
So I guess we're getting stuck on the word
should do.
counterpoint.
Yeah, it's a term Richard borrowed from music because he plays piano.
'Cause I'm assuming that these elements have to directly influence each other, which isn't true. It's more, I guess, variation in the situation.
Yeah.
So if you think about, do you know what it means musically?
No.
Okay. Well, musically, counterpoint, you could just, like, counterpoint is just 2 melodies going on at the same time, right?
Exactly.
So it's like if your guitar is playing one melody and your piano is playing a different melody, then you have counterpoint. So the guitar is not actively affecting what the piano player plays, or vice versa, but they together affect the listener differently because the listener hears them at the same time.
So they do have an influence on the situation as a whole.
Exactly.
Correct. To the experience they do, but they don't need to directly affect each other.
No, they do. Well, I want to argue that they have to, but I guess that's going off point.
I think it's that maybe I'm making it worse. They implicitly affect each other, but the piano player doesn't have to take his hands off the piano to play the guitar melody.
Yeah, that's okay. We're on the same ground.
So, Fox, if you had to, how would you apply this to sins?
So, counterpoint in sins is everywhere. It's a game of systems, systems of units, system of other players. It's especially got to do with the exploration aspect of the game, because you're placed somewhere on this tree-like system. You have to figure out firstly where your safe spot is, and then where you can go from there. And then the first point you hit a branch, you've got counterpoint. You have to, I guess you've got counterpoint because you have to think of more than one thing at a time.
Right. So if you start at your home planet and you send a scout to the right and you send a scout to the left, you might have a piano on your left and you might have a guitar on your right.
Exactly.
And we consider that counterpoint because Sins of a Solar Empire is a game of limited resources and limited time. Whether you decide to send units to the left and which units you decide to send to the right has an impact on one another and has an impact on the global availability of resources.
So this is interesting because as you guys were explaining the concept to me, I was thinking of it in terms of how the game will affect multiple things onto the player, but this seems to be the other way around, where the player will be forced to affect themselves, to split their own resources up upon the game world.
I think that makes sense. Do you agree, Adrian, or Greg, or yourself?
I think it might be another situation where it's happening, or we can describe the concept at multiple levels, where maybe what Fox just said was sort of following on from what I said about variation, which probably fits better under counterpoint, in that everything is drawing from the same pool. But likewise, there's a level at which it's happening where the challenge of 10 light frigates is a different challenge from 5 light frigates and 5 missile frigates. So those units are that's the way that the units themselves, or the actual game elements, are creating counterpoint, where at a strategic level it comes to light in more the way you were describing.
Yeah.
So yourself, what's a smaller level at which we might have counterpoint?
What, the thing I just said about ships?
Yeah, never mind. Sorry. Adrian, does that make sense to you?
No, yeah, I try to say whenever someone's saying something, so I don't have to interject. Say I agree. So.
Well, I just wanted to make sure you didn't have anything to add on.
No, what he said was on point, because, and this is one of the reasons why counterpoint is the highest level, because it's when mechanics, interplay, and variation, when all those things come together, because it's not really counterpoint if they don't work, but you're trying to describe the flow and the momentum of playing Sins and what that's like. So that's why it's one of the hardest things to talk about. But
right, the idea is that mechanics, interplay, and variation outline a general game idea where you are interacting with something in the game, and then if those three things go into a game idea, to be talking about concurrent game ideas means talking about those three things happening in different ways all at the same time.
So I think it's interesting, though, that in this situation, were we really able to isolate any of those things to just two game elements interacting? Like I think in Mario you can do that, but in Sins of a Solar Empire, I feel like for all of those we came up with examples of how they generalize to affect like everything in the game. Or like interplay, for instance, governs every action the player does.
Well, I think that's, the usefulness of these definitions is that you're always doing most of them. If you're always doing mechanics, interplay, and variation, if not counterpoint. And they're just different perspectives of, functions of the game.
Yeah, so what I was saying was I don't feel like there's, I don't know that counterpoint succeeds from the other ones in this particular case, because if you talk about the counterpoint of, having to split your forces, then that generalizes down, or the reason that you're doing that is because you're budgeting your resources, and that simultaneously is happening when you're considering the variation of challenges, where everything, I don't know, I just feel like everything happens at the same level.
There is no single challenge. Is that what you mean?
Right, because it's, yeah. And I think that this comes down to me that it's a strategy game, that, yeah, you can't isolate anything.
You are always talking about multiple units doing multiple things.
Right, and you need to always be considering the mechanics, or in terms of, I guess if you're talking about the mechanical definition I was saying about things, how things affect each other, maybe that's interplay, that always needs to be a consideration. It's always happening, and it's always happening in all the areas of the game at the same time, because it's all about distributed player control.
Yeah, it's not like with Mario where counterpoint is something that you can easily point to and say, here's, 3 different enemies that are all within, the screen's borders, that are all within close proximity to Mario, that causes him to move in different ways where they all, by themselves. And Sins, that's, way harder to really, point out, because it's, as Fox put it, that kind of shit's happening all the time, everywhere.
And even when something isn't interacting with you, they're still having a meaningful impact on the game state because they're collecting resources and building ships.
Yeah, even when you start the game, it's always changing, whether you do anything.
So I think the only way that we can point to that they try and realize this is in the different sorts of map the maps they allow you to play on. You might have there are certain maps that are generated where they specifically place you right next to a player. They'll change the map so that it's got some scarcity of resource. You're trying to point to a specific example of something that's always in the game. That's the only thing I can think of.
Yeah, I guess we talked a lot about ships, but you're right. There is
Level
we
design.
act like there's no such thing as level design in the game, but there is. Yeah,
right.
And one of the points of variation we could have mentioned is different types of planets have different resource loads and different populations. So an ice planet will always have lots of crystal and a lower population than a desert planet. They also require different resources or different research for you to take. So that allows for a sort of level design, which I think is something that might be easier to talk about specific to Sins versus combat. Mm-hmm. Because the idea of using planets is not a web of planets is, of course, not exactly how every strategy game works.
All right.
Huh.
Yeah. Did anyone have anything else to add on Sins?
No, I think Fox was really on point with bringing up the maps, because that is something worth looking at, especially with Counterpoint. Because I know with Counterpoint, that is something very helpful to use when looking at level design. And as yourself brought up, there is actually kind of a level design in this, and that's probably looking to the maps is the most useful point where we'll get Counterpoint out of this game, and what is the flow of combat in this map versus this other map, versus trying to talk about it in a more generic level. Because the thing is, like, unlike Mario, where levels are mostly static, the counterpoint is basically determined by the other player.
Yeah, in Mario, the level is everything. In a strategy game, the level it's sort of not as important.
Yeah,
It's a sandbox. It's a place we play in. It happens to have certain features, but most of it's driven by the way the other people are playing around.
yeah.
That speaks to the 4X aspect of Sins, doesn't it?
I would say that kind of speaks more to the multiplayer or competitive multiplayer aspect of it, because that's kind of the difficulty I have with talking about fighting games, is that a lot of the gameplay is going to be determined by how the other player.
But also
And
the
how they
fact that
react to
players
things.
are investing resources and changing planets to fit their needs.
I don't think it's correct to say it's something about anything to do with the 4X aspect of it, though. I would say if you wanted to look at it from a genre perspective, I think it's driven by it being a God game. That there are lots of things you can do at any given point in time. Like when I was saying you could call every single player command a mechanic, that's a lot more mechanics than Mario has.
Right.
Oh yeah.
So because of that, there's way more freedom, and that's something you'll find in any strategy game. Like, I mean, StarCraft or Command and Conquer certainly have maybe not this level of multiplicity, but certainly much more than Mario or something.
Yeah.
All right. So, before we leave, Fox, if you had to colonize a planet, what type of planet would you want to colonize?
Is this in Sins or just generally?
Yeah. Out of the planet types from Sins of a Solar Empire.
I'm always low on crystal, so I need an ice planet.
Ugh. Okay. I'm not going to be with you there. Adrian, what type of planet would you colonize?
I colonize a dwarf planet, which would be Pluto.
Okay. And yourself, what type of planet would you colonize?
I would colonize a Terran planet because I am a human.
Well, that makes one of us. Adrian, any last words?
Yes, I'm off to conquer Pluto.
Ooh, okay.
No,
See you in a couple thousand years.
Anyways, what I was going to say is I hope to keep playing Sins more. I really want to explore more of this game and have some more definitive thoughts, or at least a more coherent way of talking about this. I feel okay with what we did now, but
You wanted to beat hard, right?
yeah, I want to beat the damn hard AI at least once on each map size, so that I can get, because that actually would help us with talking about counterpoints. Like, what's the difference between playing on even just something more general, like. So I want to know the difference. So something like knowing the difference between playing on a tiny map versus playing on one of those super big ones. I would like to know that. So yeah.
Yeah, I'll give you a heads up. It's a lot different.
I can imagine. It makes the research tree more meaningful the bigger it is.
Yeah, that's the idea.
So yourself, any final words?
No, I guess this match I've been playing while we're talking, I must have gotten a super baby AI because I'm playing on hard, but he's only attacked me once, and we've been talking for like over an hour.
Oof.
And it was a really terrible attack. It was like 9 light frigates and 5 corvettes.
Oof. Harsh. Fox, any final words?
It struck me how easy it is to overlook level design in a game like this.
Yeah.
Going forward, I'd like to think more about how different maps are going to affect the way I'm playing, and if there aren't certain natural ways to traverse certain kinds of maps.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I guess you would think that for level design to be meaningful, it would have to influence like what type of units you're using and what type of structures you're building. So yeah, it would be interesting to. I mean, like I said, big maps definitely do make a difference, but I have not experimented a lot with the preset maps. I think I usually play randoms.
All right. Well, thank you all for joining me. hopefully we'll get to talk some more about Sins.
Cool.
I was going to say, in the Sins podcast, if I recall correctly, we kind of viewed Counterpoint as having like each planet is a different base, and it will be composed of different units and different resources. And so, trying to attack 2 planets at once would be kind of Counterpoint, like dividing your attention between 2 different challenges there.
Counterpoint mostly describes a type of level design, and level design is typically not the normal ways we think of level design are typically not applied to multiplayer games, right? So Mario, he has a sequence of things he has to do, and it's linear too. You go basically through the left to the right side, and you encounter these sequences. So we can then look at what's involved in those sequences and how they're ordered. But multiplayer games in general are more like a sandbox, if you will. They give you open arenas, which are areas where conflict can happen all over in these different areas, but then from there it's just up to the players to fight however they want. So we typically don't use things like counterpoint or pacing in the same way we do when we talk about like movies or 2D platformer levels. So in general, counterpoint would be analyzing how the different elements and layers in the level are designed to encourage interaction between the 2 layers, and how the interacting with the layers sets up the player for discovering things and overcoming certain challenges based on how they were kind of pushed down certain avenues and certain paths, and how ideas are transmitted because they tried to do one thing and it gives them the idea to do another. Like, we look at all that stuff for Mario, but for real-time strategy games, you really don't think of it that way. There's not only are the maps like incredibly rehearsed because there's a handful of them, and players just sort of like run these set plays for their openings, and then it's just based on whatever the other player does that determines their next move, right?
Actually,
but
that's kind of interesting in comparison to Sins of a Solar Empire, where there are some predetermined maps, but a lot of the time what you're doing is playing on a randomly generated map where you say, I want 33 planets, and I want so many planets to this type, and etc.
Mm-hmm.
And rather than a typical RTS where the maps are just pre-designed.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, ultimately it's this, when your opponent is supplying most of what you are either concerned about, must respond to, or what you're interested in, you don't really consider more advanced terms and methods for analyzing level design, because there really is no level until your opponent gets in there and starts doing stuff. So that's kind of another way of thinking about it.
Right. Because, yeah, I had an inkling we might have been misapplying the term, because I remember asking about counterpoint before, and the example you gave me was in Zelda, an Octorok, mixed with a Zora. That's the exact one I used, because 2 different enemy types, 2 different ideas, mostly in the same space. And I was thinking, well, if that's the parallel to that in an RTS is, whatever army formation they have. So say they have a bunch of long range units mixed in with a bunch of light frigates or whatever.
Yeah,
that's kind of what I thought.
Yeah, there's definitely ways for the gameplay to have all these interesting combinations and layers. We typically just consider that we just talk about, like, for RTSs, we talk about unit composition, we talk about short-term tactical strategies, we talk about strategies and things like that, but not really using the words counterpoint. And we don't really talk about layers because, like I said, it just depends on what the player is going for. And then if they do something, we just call that like, oh, that's a good strategy, that's a good composition they're using. They're using the blink stalkers to cover the high ground, and then they're using the whatever on the low ground to block them. You're like, yeah, it looks like a great combination, but it's not the same as that combination existing already, and then people have to go through the area and encounter it, and then work their way through it or discover it like a set combination. So because multiplayer is so highly emergent, right, we recognize general things like strategies, general pushes, general compositional strength, but because it's not set in stone and it's so fluid, both in what's being thrown out and how it's being countered. We don't typically talk about that in terms of layered and level design. It's just more like cool player strategies.